All right, so let's jump into this deep dive, and we're going to be talking about celebrity and the justice system, and honestly, some pretty wild observations. You saw this interview with, Sam Bankman-Fried. He's speaking from MDC in Brooklyn, and this Hip Hop DX article about "Wait for it, Diddy."
Yeah.
And I know what you're probably thinking. What on earth could these two guys have in common?
Right.
Well, they're both currently in the same unit at MDC.
It really is kind of a strange pairing, right? You've got Bankman-Fried, who was convicted of one of the biggest financial frauds. And then you have Diddy, the music and business mogul, and he's awaiting trial on charges that include sex trafficking and racketeering. So, basically running an illegal enterprise. It's so bizarre that these two guys from such different worlds are now in the same place.
Yeah, it's crazy. So, okay, I have to admit, when I first saw Diddy in jail in the same headline, I thought, okay, this has got to be some kind of PR stunt.
Yeah, I get that.
But then I watched Bankman-Fried's interview, and he describes Diddy as being kind to the other inmates, including himself, which really made me think, what does kindness even look like in a place like MDC? Especially when you consider that Bankman-Fried calls it soul-crushing.
That's a really good point, because the word kindness, it makes you think of, warmth and empathy and compassion. But how does that work in a place that's designed to be punishing, where you don't have freedom and the comforts are so limited? It makes you wonder, do acts of kindness in prison carry a different weight? Maybe they're even a way to survive in a place where there's just not a lot of hope.
It's true. It's almost like we have to come up with a whole new definition of kindness for prison. You know what I mean? Maybe just saying a kind word or sharing something small becomes a huge deal in that kind of environment.
Absolutely. And, all of this is happening while Diddy's got his own legal troubles going on. The Hip Hop DX article talks about these really disturbing allegations that have come out in a second superseding indictment. Basically, prosecutors have added even more charges to his case, and they're saying that Diddy basically put his employees through horrific conditions, like making them work crazy hours without sleep, threatening them if they didn't do what he said, and even in at least one case, forcing an employee into sexual acts.
Wow, that's intense, and it paints a very different picture of Diddy than what Bankman-Fried was talking about from his experience at MDC. It's a big contrast between, this alleged abuser and then this seemingly supportive inmate.
It really is, and I think it kind of shows us how little we actually understand people, especially public figures. We tend to create these stories about them based on what we see and hear, their carefully crafted image and their public appearances. But what happens when that image doesn't match up with information like these accusations? It makes you realize there are these sides to people that we might never really know.
Yeah, it's like we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly.
Yeah, it really is like we're trying to put together this puzzle, but we're missing half the pieces.
Yeah.
On one side, you have these serious accusations of abuse and exploitation, but on the other side, you have this weird account of kindness, however small it might seem.
Yeah.
It just makes me wonder, how much can we trust what Bankman-Fried is saying?
Yeah, that's a big question, right? We can't ignore the fact that he's a convicted criminal. I mean, this guy was found guilty of deception, on a huge scale, so it's only natural to be a little skeptical of his observations, especially because they seem to completely contradict, what the indictment says.
But do you think it's possible that their shared experience, being stuck in the same place, is kind of affecting Bankman-Fried's perspective? Maybe it's creating this weird sense of camaraderie where even small acts of decency seem way more important than they normally would.
It could be prison is such a unique environment. It creates this crazy mix of emotions and behaviors. Your freedom is gone. You're constantly being watched. You're surrounded by people who have also committed crimes. So, yeah, I think it makes sense that these conditions could create a distorted view of what's normal, where maybe the bar for kindness is much lower than it is in the outside world.
And what about Diddy's lawyers? I mean, they're completely denying all of this, saying that he's looking forward to clearing his name in court. His lawyer even said that Diddy has the support of his current and former employees and that they're ready to defend him in court.
Right, and that's important. We're hearing two very different sides of the story, and we have to remember that these are still just allegations at this point. Diddy is innocent until proven guilty, but it does make you think, how can we make sense of these two opposite portrayals?
Is it even possible for someone to be capable of both the things he's accused of in the indictment and also the acts of kindness that Bankman-Fried described? I mean, people are complicated, right? Could this be a situation where we're just seeing different sides of the same person?
That's a really interesting question. It really highlights how hard it is to understand and judge what other people do, especially when their actions seem so contradictory.
Right.
You know, we like to put people into categories like good or bad, but the truth is most people are somewhere in between. They're capable of both kindness and cruelty, depending on the situation.
So are we basically stuck with a he said, she said situation where we have to decide who's more believable, the accusers or the accused? It feels like we're in this moral maze without a map.
In a way, yeah, but I think it's important to approach this carefully. You know, we can recognize how serious these allegations are without immediately assuming guilt. We should also consider that maybe there's more to the story than we know right now.
And we can't forget about the power dynamics here. We're talking about a celebrity with a lot of money and influence being accused by people who might feel like they can't speak up against him.
Exactly. That imbalance of power can make it really hard for justice to be served. It's crucial to create a space where people feel safe to share their stories without being afraid of retaliation or being silenced.
So how do we even begin to untangle all of this? You know, the accusations, the denials, the conflicting stories. It's like we're looking at a broken mirror. Each piece shows us something different about the same person, but none of them show us the whole picture.
I think the first step is to acknowledge that there are multiple truths here. The truth of the accusers, the truth of the accused, and the truth that's somewhere in the middle.
And it's up to us, you know, as people who are trying to be informed, to look at this information critically, to consider every side of the story and to avoid jumping to conclusions. This whole thing feels like some crazy real-life morality play, where like the lines between good and bad are so blurry, and the people involved are way more complicated than we thought. It's really making me think about how we deal with these situations where, you know, someone's public image totally clashes with these private accusations.
Yeah, it's a problem we all face these days with social media, right? I mean, we're constantly seeing these carefully constructed personas that are meant to make us admire or follow these people. But then what happens when those perfect images start to crack? How do we deal with that mismatch between the image and the accusations?
Honestly, I'm having a hard time with it myself. I mean, I grew up listening to Diddy's music and watching him build his businesses and seeing all his charity work. It's tough to square that with these accusations of exploitation and abuse.
I get it. It's totally normal to feel conflicted when someone you admire is accused of doing something wrong. But I think this situation shows us that it's important to separate the art from the artist. You know what I mean? We can still enjoy someone's music or respect their business skills without ignoring or condoning the bad things they might have done.
So what do we do now? Do we just try to keep those things separate in our minds, acknowledge the accusations, but still enjoy Diddy's music? Or do we have to take a stronger stance, like boycotting his work or distancing ourselves from his brand?
I don't think there's one right answer. It's a personal decision. Everyone has to decide what feels right based on their own values and beliefs. But I do think it's important to have these conversations to really try to understand the complexities of the situation and to avoid oversimplifying things or dismissing what the people involved have experienced.
This whole thing has definitely made me think twice about putting celebrities on a pedestal, you know, without acknowledging their flaws and the potential for them to do harm. It's a reminder that even the people we admire are just human. They're capable of doing good things and bad things.
Exactly. And this case, with all its twists and turns and conflicting stories, is like a miniature version of the bigger problems we face in figuring out what's true and what's not, especially in a world where information is so easily manipulated and used against people.
Yeah, it feels like we've opened up this Pandora's box of questions about fame and accountability and just how complicated human nature really is.
And maybe that's the biggest lesson here, as confusing as this case is. It forces us to look at our own biases, our own assumptions about the people we look up to, and our own role in these systems of power and privilege.
It's a lot to think about, that's for sure. But I think it's a conversation we need to have, one that encourages us to think critically, to listen with empathy, and to be more careful about the information we consume.
And who knows, maybe by having these conversations, we can start to build a world where people are held accountable for their actions and where justice is based on fairness, understanding, and a real desire to understand the complexities of being human.
Well, this deep dive has definitely been a journey. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next time to explore more unexpected and thought-provoking topics.